Her father, Wells Fargo's own road cutter in his years on the Trinity, used to say, and Perlie Steelman had grown up hearing him say it, in the small plank house on the north edge of Weaverville, that a cliff does not know how to lie. It just knows how to keep what men put on it. Perlie was 23 the spring she went up to Devil's Elbow to find out what her father had meant. She had lost him at 17. She had lost the cabin and his notebooks at 23 to a stepfather who had spent 5 years waiting for the chance. Weaverville said the Trinity Stage Road ended at Devil's Elbow and always had, and only a fool would think otherwise. Weaverville was wrong. Her father's field papers said the road went on. She meant to prove it, and to open whatever the cliff had kept, if the cliff had kept anything at all. If you have found yourself, at some point, believing a father's word against a whole town's, hit subscribe and drop a note telling us where you're watching from tonight. It helps the channel find the people who need this kind of story most. Her name was Pearl Emmeline Steelman, called Perlie by her father, from the time she was old enough to answer to it. She was born in Weaverville, in the Trinity Alps of Northern California, in the wet spring of 1905, in a plank house on a lane behind the courthouse. Her father was Delvin Steelman, a road engineer for the Wells Fargo Stage Company on the Trinity divisions, a man who had spent his working life cutting benches into cliffs and grading switchbacks up the sides of mountains that had, in the year he was born, no roads at all. Her mother was Nettie Wing Steelman, of Weaverville, whose family had come up from Cantonese Guangdong in the 1860s, in the second wave of the gold rush, and had stayed. Her mother spoke Cantonese at home and English at the door, and called Perlie Mui Mui, little sister in the Cantonese, from the day Perlie was old enough to walk. Her mother died in the diphtheria of 1913, when Perlie was 8, and Perlie was raised by her father, alone. Mrs. Wong, who ran the small store on Main Street, and who had been her mother's cousin, took over the mother's part of the raising in the ways that mattered. Mrs. Wong called her Mui Mui too. She learned the cliff. That was the first thing. Her father took her out on his survey trips from the time she was 5, and by the time she was 10, she could read a rock face for the small clues that meant a road had once run across it. The small square powder scars from a handset blast charge, the shallow horizontal groove of an old bench cut, the iron-orange stain of a wagon pintle-hook that had scraped a cliff wall 100 times over a summer and left its color in the rock. Her father had taught her, when she was 12, the small brass road level he carried in his coat pocket, a bubble level in a brass case the size of a pocket watch, and he had made her use it on every switchback they walked so she could tell by feel when a road grade was too steep for a stage team and when it was too easy for one. He had said, more than once on a switchback above the Trinity River, "Mui Mui, a cliff does not lie about what a man put on it. It just refuses to say it out loud. Learn to read the powder scar. Learn to read the pintle stain. The cliff will tell you where the road went, if you have the patience for it." He died in the summer of 1922, in a rock slide on the North Fork of the Salmon River, on a survey trip he had told Perlie the night before was going to be the last one of the season. He was 54. He was buried in the Weaverville Chinese and English cemetery, the one the town used because Nettie's family had bought a corner of it in the 70s, and Delvin had wanted to lie beside her. Perlie was 17. She kept the small brass road level. She kept his field notebooks. She stayed in the house. Her mother had had a sister named Yoon, who had died in 1918 of the influenza, and who had left a son, Bryson Wing, Perlie's cousin, who was 2 years older than Perlie and had grown up with her in Weaverville. Bryson was Perlie's family in the way an only cousin can be. He walked her home from school when they were young and stood by her at her father's funeral when she was 17 and did not say much. He was a mining assayer's clerk. He was steady. He was, on the day her father died, the only person in Weaverville who called her Mooey Mooey besides Mrs. Wong. Her father had, in the last year of his life, been persuaded by a Weaverville widow named Ophelia Grew that he ought to remarry. Ophelia had been kind at the funeral. Delvin had married her in the spring of 1922, 4 months before he died. Ophelia had brought with her, from Eureka, a grown son of her own, Rolander Moore, a mine speculator with pale eyes and a manner that Perlie had disliked on sight, who had moved into the plank house within the week of the marriage and had made himself at home in the small back room that had been her father's office. When Delvin died, Ophelia inherited a half-share of the plank house under Delvin's will. Perlie inherited the other half. That would have been the settled thing, if it had been settled. Rolander did not permit it to be settled. Over the next 6 years, Rolander persuaded Ophelia, in 100 small ways, to sign small papers, mortgages, extensions, quitclaims, transfers of interest, until, by the summer of 1928, Ophelia had signed her half of the house into a trust that Rolander administered, and Perlie's half was under a mortgage note that Rolander had arranged on Ophelia's signature. When Ophelia died in the spring of 1928, of a stroke Perlie thought was quicker than it should have been, Rolander produced a trust document naming himself sole beneficiary of the house, on the ground that Perlie's half was subject to the mortgage note and would be foreclosed within 30 days. Perlie read the document at the kitchen table on the second evening after her stepmother's funeral. She knew Ophelia's hand. The signature was Ophelia's, but the language of the document was not language Ophelia would have used, and the mortgage note had been drawn on a paper Rolander had produced himself from a Eureka bank Perlie had never heard of. She did not fight it in court that summer. She had no money for a lawyer, and Rolander had, over the 6 years, cultivated the county recorder in Weaverville into a state of quiet compliance. She took what mattered. She took her father's small brass road level. She took her father's field notebooks, 12 leather-covered pocket books in which Delvin had recorded, from 1900 to 1922, every road he had cut and every survey he had walked in the Trinity Alps. She took the small Hills Brothers coffee tin, in which she had kept, since she was 14, coins she had earned working at Mrs. Wong's store. There was $78 in it. She took her mother's Cantonese hymn book. She took the dog Wager, a small brindle terrier mix Delvin had brought home from a survey in 1918 and who had slept at his feet every night since. Wager was 10. She took Wager. She walked out on the 8th morning, 4 blocks over, to Mrs. Wong's back room. Mrs. Wong opened the door and looked at her once and said, "Mooey, Mooey, come in. I have room, the dog too." She stayed with Mrs. Wong for the winter. She worked at the store 4 days a week and paid Mrs. Wong $2 a week for board. She spent her evenings in her father's field notebooks. She was looking for something specific. Her father had told her, on the last morning of his life, when he was pulling on his boots for the North Fork trip, a thing she had not been ready to hear then and had held back from thinking about since. He had said, "Mooey, Mooey, the Culpeper stage. You go up, I did not have time." She had asked what he meant. He had kissed her forehead. He had said, "You go up, you will find it." He had ridden out. He had not come back. She found it in the 9th notebook in an entry dated the summer of 1918. Her father had recorded a private survey trip he had walked that August up onto the shoulder of Devil's Elbow, above the Trinity River, on the old abandoned stage road that had officially ended at the cliff edge and had officially been the end of the Culpeper stage line in 1848. The Culpeper stage, Otho Culpeper, sole owner of Weaverville, had been a small independent stage running miners between Shasta City and the diggings on the upper Trinity, and it had shut down in the summer of 1848 when Otho Culpepper's last coach had gone missing on the run up to Devil's Elbow with a strong box aboard and had not been heard of again. The Weaverville verdict, then and since, was that Otho and his crew had driven over the cliff in the fog and had gone into the Trinity River 800 feet below. Her father had, in 1918, walked the cliff face above the supposed accident point and had found something else. He had found, on a ledge his eye caught only from a particular angle in the late afternoon, a bench cut, a hand-blasted horizontal shelf about 4 feet wide, cut into the cliff face at a slight downward grade, running east around the rock spur that Weaverville had assumed was the end of the world. He had walked it. He had walked it 3/4 of a mile east, around the spur, into a natural amphitheater in the cliff wall, a small hidden cirque with a stream at its floor and a bench of flat ground about half an acre wide. On the bench, the remains of a small stone depot, 3 stone buildings, roofless, standing to about 4 feet, one of them clearly a corn crib with its entrance bricked up. He had looked at the depot. He had not gone into any of the buildings. He had walked back the way he had come, in the margin of the entry. In his neat road-cutter's hand, he had written, "The Culpeper stage did not go over the cliff. It went around the spur." Otho was carrying more than freight. The bricked-up crib is his. If I ever have the summer to walk back with a tool, I will. If not, muy muy, this is yours. The cliff has been keeping it. The bench cut has held. Walk in the late afternoon so you can see it. She read the entry 3 times. She read it a 4th. She closed the book. Wager thumped his tail on the store floor. Perlie said aloud, "All right, Papa," in the late afternoon. She spent the winter learning what she could. Mrs. Wong knew a man in Weaverville, old Mundo Palafox, a retired road cutter who had come up from a Basque family in Grande Ronde country in Oregon and who had spent 40 years working for Wells Fargo and for the county on Trinity and Klamath road jobs. And Mrs. Wong made the introduction. Mundo Palafox was 74 in 1928. He lived in a small stone cottage above the Trinity River, alone with an old ginger cat named Bench. He knew Delvin Steelman's name. He knew Delvin Steelman's field notebooks by their bindings. He looked at Perlie a long moment on his porch and said, "You are Delvin's mooey mooey." She nodded. He said, "Come in, bring the dog." She sat with him 3 afternoons a week for 4 months. He taught her the finer grade of cliff reading her father had not had time to teach, how to read a bench cut at the far end for the sign of a natural end and the sign of a man-made end, how to test rock stability with a small round hammer, how to read a bricked-up entrance for the date of the bricking. He said over and over, in his slow, careful voice, "A cliff does not know how to lie. It just knows how to keep what men put on it. Read what is on it. Do not add." She would repeat that on the ledge 2 months later, silently, at the moment she needed it most. 2 Weaverville skeptics she left behind that spring were the county recorder, Alaric Boggs, who had told her over his counter, when she filed the abandoned property notice for the Culpeper Depot, that she was throwing her father's memory away chasing a stage road that had died at Devil's Elbow 80 years ago, and Otho Culpepper's own grandnephew, Byron Culpeper, who owned the Trinity feed and grain, and who had told her at his door that the Culpeper family had settled the loss of the stage in the 50s and did not need it reopened. Neither mattered. Her real trouble was Rolander Muir, who filed a claim on the 8th of April against the abandoned property notice on the grounds that the depot site was on land included in a mining claim he had filed with the county the previous November. He had filed the claim 2 months before Perlie had put her notice in. He had, she now saw, been anticipating her. She went to the young Weaverville lawyer Mundo had named a slow, careful man named Jerome Kell, who worked out of a small office over the drugstore and who took her case for a share of whatever the depot yielded. Jerome Kell filed for a temporary hold on Rolander's claim, on the ground that the mining claim was fraudulent because there was no mine on the site. The Trinity County Court agreed to hold the claim in abeyance until the depot was examined. Perlie had 40 days. She rode out to Devil's Elbow with Mundo Palafox and Bryson Wing on the last Monday of April. They took 2 pack mules. They took her father's small brass road level. They took ropes, a small round hammer, a chisel, a shovel, a coil of hemp rope, and a small hooded lantern. Wager rode on Bryson's saddle. They camped that night at the switchback below the elbow. In the morning, in the last angle of morning light, because her father had said late afternoon, and Mundo had said early morning would work as well because the light was low from either side. They walked out onto the road above the cliff, and Mundo held the light glass to the rock face at the east edge of the spur, and Perlie saw, in the low sun, exactly what her father had described: a shallow horizontal shelf, 4 feet wide, cut into the cliff face. Running east and slightly down, she stood on the road above and looked at it a long moment, she said, aloud in the still morning. "Papa, I see it," Mundo said, quietly beside her. "Slow. The rock has been alone 80 years. Do not startle it." They lowered themselves onto the bench cut one at a time. Bryson stayed at the top with the mules. Mundo went first, then Perlie, with Wager, in a canvas sling against her chest, because the bench was too narrow for a dog to walk beside her. The bench was cut cleaner than she had expected. A hand-blasted shelf with the powder scars still visible on the ceiling of the cut. A slight outward slope for water drainage. A stone gutter at the inner edge. It was the work of a first-rate road cutter. It was Otho Culpepper's own work, most likely, done in the years the stage was running. It was the kind of work Delvin Steelman would have recognized on sight, because Delvin had done work like it for 30 years. They walked the bench for the better part of an hour, going slow. The bench ran east, curved north around the shoulder of the spur, then descended in a long, gentle grade for another quarter-mile. At the far end, the cliff wall opened, and they stepped through into the amphitheater her father had drawn. Perlie stopped. The cirque was as her father had described it. A small stream ran the length of the floor, a half-acre of level bench, grassed. 3 stone buildings, roofless, standing to about 4 feet, a small barn, a small office, and, in the far corner, a squat stone corn crib with its door built into the east wall and bricked up flat with river stone and mortar. She said quietly, "There you are." They walked down to the depot. Wager ran ahead and stopped at the corn crib and sat. She began work on the crib the next morning. She did not rush it. She read the bricking first. The mortar was old lime mortar, mixed with fine sand and set well. The bricking was riverstone laid in courses, the seams tight. The work had been done by a competent hand. In a hurry, she could see, in one course, where the mason had reversed a stone to save time, but with intent to be permanent. It was Otho Culpepper's own work, most likely. He had bricked the crib himself, at the end, and had walked the bench cut back around the spur, and had died somewhere she did not yet know. She removed the bricks one at a time. She used the small round hammer to tap them free at the mortar joints and the chisel to lift them out. She set each stone to the side in the order she had removed it. It took her the whole of the second day. On the third morning, she lifted out the last stone. The crib was open. Inside, the crib was dry. The stone walls had kept it that way. The floor was flagged with slate. In the center of the floor, on a low wooden pallet that had rotted to a soft gray outline, but was still recognizable as a pallet, sat a cast-iron strongbox, and beside it, a small oak trunk. She stepped inside. She said, "Mr. Culpepper." "I am Perlie Steelman." "Delvin Steelman's Mui Mui. I have come to look." She knelt beside the strongbox. She did not touch it yet. She turned to the oak trunk first. It was smaller than the strongbox. It was closed with a simple wooden latch, corroded but not locked. She lifted the latch, she lifted the lid. Inside of the oak trunk were three things: a framed daguerreotype wrapped in a linen handkerchief, a woman in her 40s in a black dress, her hair up, her eyes direct, a small bundle of letters tied with a black ribbon, and a folded oilcloth packet with a stone tucked into the fold to keep it flat over the ears. She lifted the daguerreotype. She uncovered the handkerchief. She looked at the face of a woman she did not know but recognized at once as the mother her father had never had the chance to meet. Otho Culpepper's mother. She would learn later, from the letters and from the county records at Shasta City, that the woman was Marguerite Culpepper of Weaverville, who had died in 1847 while Otho was on the road, and who had been buried in the Weaverville Old Miners Cemetery without her son at the graveside, because Otho had been cutting a bench on the North Fork on the day of the funeral and had not been able to make it back in time. Otho had, the letters showed, planned every summer for 6 years to cut a road home to his mother's grave, and had not managed it, because he had been cutting roads for other people's fortunes each of those summers, and the season was always too short. She set the daguerreotype aside. She lifted the letters. She would read them at Mrs. Wong's later. She lifted the oilcloth packet. She untied the leather cord. Inside were two things: a folded sheet of foolscap in Otho Culpepper's own hand, headed Testament and Final Freight Manifest, Culper Stage, July 1848, and a single sealed letter addressed simply to whoever finds this. She opened the sealed letter. It was not long. Otho Culpepper wrote that if the letter had been found, then the bricking had been taken down, and the taker was welcome to what was in the strongbox. Every dollar he had saved out of 30 years of stage work, and a note of assignment to whoever took it that he had drawn to be legal under California Civil Code as of the summer of 1848. He wrote that he had bricked the crib and had built the depot and had cut the bench cut for reasons he did not think were much use explaining, and had died. He wrote had died in the past tense because he had written the letter knowing he would not come back, because he had been cutting roads for every prospector's fortune in the Trinity country for 30 years and had never once cut a road home to his own mother's grave, and had discovered, on the summer he was writing, that the only road he had wanted to cut was the one he had not made time for. He wrote, and Perlie would remember these lines the rest of her life, that a road cutter who cuts roads for every stranger's fortune and never cuts a road home to his own mother's grave is not the road cutter he had thought he was. He wrote that he was bricking the crib himself. He wrote that he was going to walk the stench cut back around the spur and was going to try to make it down the North Fork to Weaverville in time to sit at his mother's grave for an hour before the winter took him. He wrote he did not think he would make it. He wrote he hoped, if he did not, that a person who found the crib would take the money and would use it to cut whatever road they had not made time for, and would understand that this was what the road was for. He signed his name, under his name, in a smaller hand, Mui Mui, whoever you are. Marguerite Culpepper was my mother. Sit an hour at her grave for me. I would like that. Mui Mui, in the Cantonese. She had not known that Otho Culpepper had been raised, in part, by a Cantonese neighbor in Weaverville in the 50s, and had used the word all his life and had used it in his last letter in the address to a stranger. Later she would find, at the Trinity County Museum, a Weaverville obituary of a Chinese laundress named Mrs. Fan in 1846, in which Otho Culpepper's name appeared as a mourner, listed in the local paper because Otho had paid for the burial. Perlie would understand, when she found the obituary, that Otho had learned the word from Mrs. Fan, who had been to him the mother, his own mother, had ceased being able to be during her long illness. She sat down on the slate floor of the corn crib with the letter in her lap. Mundo Palafox stood in the doorway and did not come in. He read her face. He turned away. She read the letter again. She copied it into her father's 9th notebook, in pencil, word for word. She refolded Otho Culpepper's original in the oilcloth. She whispered Marguerite Culpepper's name aloud. She would sit at the grave. She would sit an hour, as he had asked. She would take Mundo Palafox with her. She would take Wager. Mrs. Wong could not walk that far, but she would come in the wagon. Bryson would come. She opened the strongbox last. She wedged her father's brass road level against the shackle of the padlock and struck the blunt end of the case with a river stone she had brought for the purpose. The shackle rang. It did not give. She struck it again. It rang, did not give. She struck it a third time, harder, and it broke, and the two pieces of the lock fell against the slate with the small, clean sound iron makes indoors. She lifted the lid. Coin, silver and gold together, mostly small denominations packed in a canvas bag that it held. Under the coin, a folded assignment note in Otho Culpepper's hand, signed and dated the summer of 1848 in Weaverville, before a witness, one Aeneas Fan, whose signature underneath was in a neat Cantonese-taught English, assigning all right, title, and interest in the sum contained in the strongbox to the finder, upon the taking down of the bricking, without further condition. The note was drawn in the plain language of a country lawyer, and, Jerome Kell would later confirm, at the Weaverville courthouse it was legally sufficient in California Civil Code, as it had stood in 1848, and as it stood in 1928. She would learn, in the weeks that followed, that the sum came to something over $9,000 in coin at face value, and something greater in numismatic terms, once the State Museum took an interest, which it would. She did not think about the number in the crib. She thought about the assignment note. She thought about Aeneas Fan, whose great-nephew ran the drugstore on Main Street in Weaverville and had bagged Perlie's tooth powder every month for 20 years. They hauled the strongbox and the oak trunk out along the bench cut on the third day. Bryson brought the mules down. The three of them walked the trunk between them like pallbearers. Perlie carried the daguerreotype in her canvas bag against her chest. Wager rode on Bryson's saddle. They reached Weaverville on the 5th evening. Perlie did not go to the courthouse first, and she did not go to Mrs. Wong's first. She went to the Weaverville Old Miners' Cemetery first, with Mundo and Bryson beside her, and the wagon holding Mrs. Wong and Aeneas Fan's great-nephew waiting at the gate, and she sat at Marguerite Culpepper's grave for a full hour with Otho Culpepper's letter in her lap and did not speak. Nobody in the little party spoke either. The light went out of the sky over the Trinity Alps. Perlie stood at last and said quietly, in the direction of the stone, "Mrs. Culpepper, your son sends his sorrow. It took him a long time, then they went home." Jerome Kell filed the assignment note with the Trinity County Recorder on the following Monday. The court struck Rolander Muir's mining claim as fraudulent within 30 days, on the strength of Delvin Steelman's field notebooks and Mundo Palafox's testimony. The court also struck Rolander's trust document on the house, on the strength of a witness Jerome Kell had located in Eureka, who confirmed that the mortgage note had been drawn on a bank that had not existed on the date shown. The plank house came back to Perlie as Delvin Steelman's only heir. Rolander Moore left Weaverville within the year. He was heard of, briefly, running a small speculation office in Reading. Perlie did not go looking. Vindication does not require a person to travel. She used the coin from the crib for 4 things. She bought back the plank house free and clear. She commissioned a small marble stone for Marguerite Culpepper's grave, with Otho Culpepper's name added below hers, so that the mother and son, who had missed each other in life, could sit under one stone in death. She funded a small roadcutters fund at the Weaverville school in her father's name, to be used to pay a scholarship each year to a Trinity County student who wanted to study civil engineering. She put the balance in a savings bank in Reading and touched it only in November for Mrs. Wong's Chinese New Year fund, which Mrs. Wong ran out of the back of her store and which fed the older widows on Main Street through the winter. Wager is buried at the fence corner nearest the road, where he liked to sit in the late light and watch the traffic. There is a smooth serpentine stone over him, with his name scratched in with a nail. Mundo Palafox died in 1934 at his stone cottage above the Trinity, with Bench the ginger cat in his lap. In the same afternoon light, he had told Perlie to walk out to Devil's Elbow Inn. Perlie laid the last of the coping stones on his grave herself. Mrs. Wong lived to be 91 and died in her own bed above the store, with Perlie holding her hand, and her last word was "mooey mooey." Perlie did not marry. She was asked once by Jerome Kell, and she said she was grateful and unavailable, and she thought about it afterward, but not for long. Bryson Wing married a school teacher from Reading in 1930 and remained her cousin the rest of her life. Some things a person understands only from a cliff. Perlie understood, over the years, that Otho Culpepper had cut roads for every prospector's fortune in the Trinity country for 30 years, and had not cut a road home to his own mother's grave, and had learned it too late and had bricked a crib to say so. That her own father had walked the bench cut in 1918 and had not gone into the crib because he wanted her to, and that the small brass road level she carried in her belt was a tool for reading a grade she was still, all her life, learning to walk. The coin in the strong bobox had bought back a house and a stone and endowed a fund and fed the widows. The letter had done more, because the letter had put a name under Marguerite Culpepper's name on a stone in a cemetery where the name had been alone for 80 years. Weaverville had said, the spring Perlie Steelman went out to Devil's Elbow, that the stage road ended at the cliff. The cliff, in fact, had another opinion. So did the bench cut, which had been holding a road 80 years, waiting on a mooey mooey to walk it back home. If you have ever had a road you meant to cut for somebody you loved and did not get to before the season ended, drop a comment below and tell us what road it was. I read them all. See you in the next one.